Good evening and welcome to Westchester Newsline. My guest this week is Richard Berman, who is running for the Democratic nomination for Congress. We take Newsline live on Monday evenings, and we had some technical difficulties in the first 2 minutes of our program last night. So we're going to pick it up after that point. I just asked Mr. Berman why he is running for the Democratic nomination for Congress from Westchester.
Our record and my record that I've been involved with was, again, trying to solve problems within our fiscal constraint. When I was in Governor Carey's cabinet and we were very concerned about health care for our elderly, and you remember we'd come out of that horrible time about the Moreland Commission and abuses in nursing homes, we were charged with improving the quality of care and at the same time living within our budget and, in fact, saving taxpayers' money. And so whether that makes me a more moderate or a realist or a person who has a record of management within limited resources and a demonstration of ability to bring better care to people, that's what I stand for. Labels just really don't do much for me.
How will you differ then from the other candidates who are running for the same nomination? Why should they vote for Richard Berman instead of for someone else?
Because there is not another candidate in the field, Kevin, that has a record of accomplishment, a record of demonstrated success in solving some of our toughest problems, taking care of the elderly in terms of nursing homes, improving the quality of health care, of saving the taxpayers' money. I mean, I have to tell you a story that when we got involved in Medicaid and the nursing homes, and as you know, there's a graying of America, and everybody said we ought to build more nursing homes. Well, people didn't want to go to nursing homes. They didn't want to be dependent. And yet, that was the conventional wisdom. What we did instead was talk to them, worked with the private sector, worked with the elderly, and developed a program called Nursing Home Without Walls. It's a program where we were able to solve their problems by bringing the care into their homes. So that instead of being dependent, and instead of having to leave their communities, elderly could be at home and get the services, and it saved the state taxpayers money. Now that's important. And when they look and say, hey, you know, he was very creative in housing in terms of developing some innovative new programs that worked in Westchester. If you look at the Neighborhood Preservation Program in Washingtonville, North Yonkers, the Ossining Interfaith Council Program, you see a variety of rehabilitation programs, variety of concepts like shared housing, where people could join in existing housing stock and find affordable housing. That's why people will vote for me. People will come out and say, I want somebody who cares. I want somebody who's done something. I don't want a person who has never had federal experience. I don't want to elect and test somebody who doesn't understand the problems and concerns of Westchester people. I want somebody who's been there, who's not always taken the easy road, has taken very complex issues and solved them.
Okay. Two of those issues you mentioned we're going to get into. One about senior citizens, another about housing, two pressing problems here in Westchester. But let's talk for just a second here about something else. I guess I'm getting back to the philosophy here. You'll have to excuse me. Governor Cuomo was famous when he gave his keynote address, and addressing Ronald Reagan almost as much as a convention, he said, America is a tale of two cities tonight. What about Westchester? Perhaps are there two Westchesters? And what I mean by that is there a Westchester that... I've lived in Westchester most of my life. I'm a Westchester native. Is there two Westchesters, perhaps a rich one and a poor one, and are they moving in different directions?
No, I think that they're not. And I think that what we find in Westchester, and I've been in and rung doorbells and talked with people in all economic spectrums, there's a Westchester that has serious problems. It is known to be affluent, as you said, but you know, the problems cut across economic lines. Affordable housing is not just a problem for low economic people. Drugs, teenage suicide, the educational level of our kids cuts across all the communities. So we have a lot of important issues that are best solved by looking at the issues and working out the solutions.
Will you support the Democratic nominee if it's not you, if it's one of the people who have already announced?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
I have not been the favorite child of the Democratic
You mentioned
Party.
that when you announced that.
And you remember that when I was appointed by Governor Kerry, I was a registered independent, and in fact it was the chairman of the Westchester County Democratic Party that was upset at the governor for picking somebody on merit and not out of the party. And not, but you know, I try to bring about change, and the best way to bring about change is within an organization.
Okay.
And so I will support the nominee.
We've been talking about Democrats. Well, let's talk about the Republican in this race. And he is in the race. He announced he'll be running again. Joe DioGuardi. How do you feel about his record? And he's got the record to run on. He's been in 2 years. Beat Orrin Tiker 2 years ago. How do you feel about Joe?
Well, I think Joe, as a congressman, is probably the worst representative that any community could have, but especially Westchester County. Joe has not, in his entire time there, developed or concentrated on one single problem that directly affects the lives of Westchester. He has not come up with a permanent housing solution. He has not come up even with a demonstration or trial program to improve anything in the quality of life in this area. He has actually walked from some very basic responsibilities.
Like what? Give me a for instance.
Well, the easiest one is Graham-Rudman. Graham-Rudman was a bill that said, hey, look, Congress is not being very effective at solving its problems, and therefore they can't grapple with the very tough decisions.
I tell you, you wouldn't have voted for Graham-Rudman.
No, because you elect a congressman to make those tough decisions. Congress is where the values of America are set, and the way the values are shown is where we put our money. And so the budget process and the appropriation process become very important to really putting real meaning behind our words. And when a congressman says, I can't make those tough decisions about money in housing or money in health care, or taking a little bit out of defense and putting it back in problems that affect Westchester, I'll delegate that to a formula or to the executive branch, then we've lost the whole constitutional purpose of an executive branch and of a representative Congress.
Do you think Congressman DioGuardi will be hard to beat this year?
Oh, I think he'll be much tougher than he was a year and a half ago. You know, there's something very powerful about being an incumbent. Not only do you get free mail and free publicity, and you're all over in terms of getting support because you are the incumbent, but he's got a lot of money already stored away. And I think that even though his record is very bad, that given the money and given the media and given the free mailing and given the consultants he's hired who do some of the best Republicans around, he's going to be very tough. But I think the people of Westchester will see right through that facade.
Again, give me some other examples. You're the man who's going to be challenging him. You're the one who wants to run against him.
Sure.
Besides Graham-Rudman, what other thing?
He voted for aid to the Contras. $100 million he was willing to put to aid the Contras, and not a single dollar for permanent housing for anybody in Westchester County or anybody in the United States. He did not stand up and protect the Social Security. He has not stood up and said, you know, I'm concerned about the future of this country. I'm concerned about the future of Westchester. One of the great honors and obligations of a congressman is to do two things. One is to represent the people of your district and try to help them. And the other is to be a part of national value setting and strategy. He has not done either. Let's go back to what he's done in Westchester County. Has he helped solve any of our problems of education, of housing, of health care, of trying to figure out how people who are elderly living on below poverty guidelines? As you know, there was a recent study which showed 1/3 of all people over 65 in the state of New York live on incomes under $7,000. Now, they have some very significant problems, but they have made this a great country. They have made it so that we can sit here today. They have stood up, and we cannot forget them, and we better be in there pitching for them. and he is silent.
One of the issues that you've brought up, and you do have some experience in it, is in the area of housing. Housing is one of the most important issues pressing Westchester today. The average price for houses is over $200,000 now. And again, when I was mentioning earlier, perhaps two Westchesters, that's one reason where there is two Westchesters, people who can afford that price and people who cannot. Is it a matter of economics? If so many people want to live here in Westchester and so many people are ready to spend $200,000 for a house, people are going to sell the houses for $200,000. What can be done to help this housing crisis?
Oh, I think it's, again, has to be very targeted. But for the elderly, we can provide programs who are now in their houses, whether it's shared housing or helping with the mortgage or reinventing the loan funds so they can keep up their housing. We can do that. You know, we had the Sunny May program that was developed when I was part of the Sunny May board, which provided an opportunity for first-time home buyers to be able to afford a new home because we took out a lot of the burden of the initial down payment and the high cost of interest. We can come back to a revolving fund. Some of our programs that provided federal subsidies for the elderly to build new housing, some of the what we refer to technically as Section 202, which were subsidies for both to encourage the builder to build and to provide it so that a person on a fixed income could afford housing if they were elderly. Those programs ought to be restored. The federal government cannot walk from people who have made this country strong.
Can those programs be restored today, especially with the mood in Washington, cut, 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 and with Graham-Rudman, again, cut? Can those programs be restored?
Yeah, again, it depends what our basic values are. I believe very strongly that what the Congress is about is saying what is right and what is wrong. And I cannot believe in such a huge military budget we cannot find a little bit of money to come back and work on our very basic needs. You know, we have to think about what this country is going to be like 50 years from now. And unless we start thinking about protecting our investment, investing in these young kids, you know, to take away and to now create a barrier, which is people can't afford college, is a mistake. This is the biggest and best and brightest natural resource we have, our children. And to not be concerned with their education and in fact encourage them to be doing more, they will never compete with Japan and other countries in the future. If we don't consider the health care of our population and the young kids and the mothers and the elderly, we're not going to have a strong America. A strong America in the future is one that's productive, and you can't have a productive America if you're not reaching out and helping people.
Okay, again, I remember when you did announce at your press conference, you called for some other programs, and you called for a lot to do for people. But again, my question is, with the mood in Congress, is that realistic?
Yeah.
Can you put those, especially as if you, let's say you are elected as a freshman congressman, could you get some of those programs through?
The answer is absolutely. You know, the way decisions are made are by people working hard. I have always worked hard and brought about change. Those of you who've known me and seen me know when the federal government had no interest in saving Brooklyn Jewish Hospital, and I would spend time with the Congress and with the White House and with all the people we needed to do to save an institution that was vital to the minority community in that area, we did it. And how did we do it? We did it by a lot of hard work. We did it the old-fashioned way. And I believe that people, and it's confirmed because I've been out ringing doorbells for the last 3 weeks, and I've talked to a lot of people, Kevin, and they care. And I was recently down in Washington for a briefing on some international affairs as well as some domestic issues, and talked to a lot of congressmen. They're looking for leadership. They really do care. And they know that they've not had that type of leadership. And I want to go down there and do it.
Okay, now it's time to hop around and talk about some foreign affairs. I like this because it's usually we talk about the county level things here, and it gives me a chance to break out. So let me give you some questions on foreign affairs.
Great.
Give me your answers and the issues, how you see them. First, let's go to the Middle East. Israel. What is your position on it?
Oh, I think that for a lot of reasons, I'm a very strong and staunch supporter of Israel. And I not only say that in Jewish communities, I say it in Bronxville, and I'm glad to say it on your television. There is no country, none of our allies, who have given us more support than Israel. There is none that is so crucial to our military and economic strength in the Mideast but Israel. And, you know, whether you look at it from a strategic reason or even the technology. You know, we actually now, when I was at NYU, would import artificial skin from Israel. Their technology and their advance have been very important to us. As you know, in the electronics and even in the aircraft area and in some of our military weaponry, we've relied on Israel. Israel was one of those countries that we did not have to go ask before we retaliated against Libya's terrorism.
But what about the long-term solution in the Middle East? What right do the Palestinians have? Everyone in this country is pro-Israel. What right do the Palestinians have, and how can that be recognized so that we can at least make a beginning on a long-term solution to the problems in the Middle East?
I think we ought to basically stay with the Camp David Accord. And Egypt has had a very strong and important leadership role in that, and we ought to support that. And as you know, in our foreign aid budget, we do support that. And I think that's where our position ought to be.
Do you agree with President Reagan's action against Libya?
Yeah, absolutely. The only question I would have as a congressman is I would like him to consult with Congress before he did it. But there's no other way to respond to terrorism. I think that we ought to now take another step, which talks about economic and social sanctions. And that is that, you know, again, to be talking about using American dollars in trade to Libya or to companies that do business in Libya, I think we can be more effective and as effective if we use a combination of tools. So to have the State Department put a travel advisory out to reduce travel to Libya, to have companies discouraged from doing business with countries that continue to support terrorism, I think is vital. I think it's vital to the strength of our country.
Would you have voted for the aid package to the Contra rebels that President Reagan put before Congress, that Joe DioGuardi voted for? Would you have voted for that?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not.
Why not?
I think it's a mistake to mislead the public about $100 million to a group that has such questionable background, etc. It's clear to me that if we want to make a commitment to send our people in and to know that we're going to likely follow that with a lot more money and probably American lives, that's one decision. I would not support that. But the $100 million is a teaser to get us involved, and I think we ought to have learned that it's not such a bad idea to let some internal conflicts go on without us being there.
So you wouldn't have any, would you have any policy whatsoever to Nicaragua, or would you just leave them alone?
Well, at this point in time, I think it's premature for us to get involved in Nicaragua.
Okay. Let's move up the continent of South America a little bit, up into Central America, El Salvador.
Again, I would at this point stay out.
What is your position on nuclear power?
I think that we have learned now that the pros and cons of nuclear power are a very tough decision. But it is clear to me that a lot of the things that we thought could be done safely, and therefore the balance was to go ahead with nuclear power, turn out not to be as true. And so without condemning the past, I think that we should not open shore them. We should not, in fact, initiate any other nuclear plants.
How about Indian Point, the one that's our neighbor here?
Well, I think that number one is we ought to insist that immediate teams be sent in there and sent in constantly. And if it requires a duplication of manpower, since it seems to be human error that seems to be the cause of most of the difficulties, then I think it is important for the federal government to supply that. And I think that we ought to work through some alternative power strategies, whether it's hydropower, as we've learned from upstate, or if it's solar power or whatever, that we ought to move ahead so that we can talk about alternate programs and begin to phase out some of these plants.
Okay, let's go into the economic issues for a few moments. Again, this is where Mr. DioGuardi says he has the expertise. He is the certified public accountant, one of 4, I believe, in Congress. Where should, with the deficit, let me ask you, what should be done about the deficit? How can that be brought down?
Yeah, let me just respond to Joe DioGuardi. Joe DioGuardi is a CPA. CPAs are trained to count the deficit. I'm glad that Joe DioGuardi made the point that he was a CPA and he counts the deficit. Since he's been there, he's counted a bigger deficit. His CPA has had nothing to do with the real issue. The real issue is not counting the dollars that grow in the deficit. The issue is taking our government and our responsibilities and managing it within our resources.
How can we
That's
manage
the
it?
key.
Are you talking about taxes, more cuts in different areas? How can it be done?
I'm talking about priorities. Number one is, and I know it's a quick throwaway, but I think it does take more time, and that is, it is clear now that even the Heritage Foundation and the Grace Commission and what I would call the traditional right-wing groups that were calling for doubling the military budget have now said that you could take $65 billion out of the defense budget without in any way affecting our strategy or our safety or our military strength and security. And so therefore I would take that opportunity to do that. Number two is, I think that we can, as we did in this state, again with the health care programs and the housing programs, run our social programs more efficiently and more effectively. And to do that, to craft those solutions, you have to know those programs, you have to have administered those programs, you have to have been out there with the people. I've done that. I'm the only candidate, Republican or Democrat, that has done that. The third is that I think we ought to take a hard look at the foreign trade. I believe that the most serious problem we're going to have in the future is foreign trade. I think the foreign trade deficit is a symptom. It's a symptom of a more basic fundamental problem. And the fundamental problem is that we are not the economic strength that we used to be. Why are we not the economic strength? Is we haven't invested in America. We haven't invested in education. We haven't invested to the right level in jobs. We're not investing in new plants and modernization in this country. And in fact, have given tax incentives for companies that are based here to do that in Europe. And we have not recognized the new strategies of dealing with worldwide competition. And they may include some government subsidies. But we ought to be able to make and market our materials overseas and be still the best. We've got the smartest and best people in the world. And if we turn them on to this challenge, we can turn around the trade deficit. Turn around the trade deficit, a lot of our problems become more manageable. And what's worse is if we don't concentrate on planning for the future and turning that trade deficit around, no matter what sort of balancing tricks you do, you're going to be in real trouble.
Okay, we've got just a few minutes here, so excuse me if it seems like I'm rushing it, but they do only give us 30 minutes on Westchester Newsline. What are your positions on the issue of the death penalty?
Yeah, the death penalty is one that troubles me, and I've had a lot of soul searching on that. And I am very concerned with the rise in crime, and more importantly with the feeling that people have when I go to visit them and knock on their doors, and the elderly lady stands behind her door with 3 chains across, afraid to go out in the street.
Does the death penalty have any effect? Does that make that person feel better, or is it worthwhile? Do you think it's...
I still, after thinking of everything and being as concerned about the person, I'm against the death penalty. I am for what the governor says and what Hugh Carey said, which was to lock them up and throw away the key. No way out, baby. And, you know, spending your life there is probably as bad. But more importantly, that's not the fundamental to change safety in the streets. That's not the way that we're going to make it safe so that people can go outside in their neighborhoods again. We have to attack the crimes that are not in that group that would be subject to a death penalty or to life without parole. Let's take a hard look at the drug problem. Let's take a hard look at the crimes on persons and what are the mandatory sentences for repeat offenders. Let's start to provide some real positive support for those programs in the high schools and in the elementary schools and in the colleges that encourage and support peer groups that say, no more drunken driving. You drive, you don't drink. Or let's support those kids who are saying no to drugs. You know, we always spend all our money and all our effort sort of attacking people after they have a problem.
Right.
One of the things we learn in healthcare is that prevention sometimes is much more valuable and much more cost-effective and has longer-term effects.
All right, we're almost out of time here. One more issue I'm going to ask you your position on abortion. Should the federal government pay for abortion where a person themselves can't?
Oh, absolutely. I don't take your assumption that a person themselves can't. I think it is not the government's job to say whether a woman should or should not, in fact, have an abortion.
But how about federally funded abortions?
Federal, it should be an individual person's, woman's right, in consultation with her doctor and her family, to make that decision. Whether that is paid for by federal government or paid for by private insurance or paid for out of their pocket is not the issue. That right is an important right that ought to be protected for the woman.
What has been the response to your campaign so far?
You know, it's been terrific. I have to tell you that getting out and seeing people and talking to them in their homes and saying to them, I care about you, not because I'm running for office and I'm not a first-timer in this field, but look at where I've been. Look at what I've done in hospitals. Look what I've done in Westchester Jewish Community Services. Look what I've done. I've devoted my whole life to caring for people and making this a better life. And now I want to take that caring and concern and effective accomplishment and represent you. That's what they want to hear. They don't care about party names or labels. They want somebody who's got a reputation earned for taking care and looking out for them.
Okay, I want to thank you for coming down to Westchester Newsline. It's been a hot night here. I should probably point out to our audience that we lost our air conditioning right before we went on the air. It's good for me. I got to sweat off a few more pounds. I hope you didn't mind, Mr. Berman.
I enjoyed it.
Okay.
Thanks, Kevin, a lot for having me.
It's going to be a long campaign, so we'll be talking again.
Terrific.
Okay.
Looking forward.
From all of us here at Cable 3 News, a hot Cable 3 News studio tonight, thank you for joining us on Westchester Newsline. I'm Kevin McCabe. We'll see you next week. Good night.